Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And today, I'm going to talk to you. It's quite cold here, I should mention. We're beginning to enter into our very brief winter. Maybe where you are, it's probably getting warm, odds are, unless you're in the southern hemisphere. But on the plus side, I'm in the country that's had the most successful response to the entire current viral situation. This video is not about that subject, though. Please don't demonetize me. I'm going to talk about instead a thing I think is a sign, a number of things going on at the same time that I think are a sign of the decline of the SJWs, because I think I see historical parallels to say that the whole social justice warrior movement has entered into its end stage. Oh, there's Chung's sister. She's peeking out into the cold. But let me start by bringing it right into the gaming-related subject. A couple of days ago on Twitter, where all fun and exciting controversial events related to gaming happen, there was this person whose tag name, but not her ID, is Ruby. I don't really want people to go hunting for this person to harass them or anything like that, so that's all that you really need to know, I think. Made a post where they said, D&D stands be like, this is a completely apolitical, D&D, right, is a completely apolitical game about adventurers exploring an uncharted world, killing the people who are there, who live there, and taking their stuff, right? So it was obviously meant to be an ironic post, and just in case, because the SJWs always have to be really over the top direct, that was followed by a post saying, this is obviously being ironic, and it's because D&D is a game that is full of inherent colonialist elements. And so they were kind of trying to pretend that because D&D is a game of going into the unknown to fight monsters and seek treasures, that's colonialism. Now, the funny thing is that there was obviously some reaction to this post, and the person followed up with a post saying, look, I can 100% assure you that the people that are critiquing D&D today, we don't really have any interest in playing it. We play indie RPGs, right? So they went on to admit, take note, Wizards of the Coast, that this person and all of their friends who spend all of their time doing stuff like saying D&D is colonialist, orcs are racist, fire Mike Merles, all of those people do not play D&D. They don't purchase D&D products. They're not your customers, Wizards of the Coast. And they've admitted it, And then, of course, a day or two later, this person started publicly crying on Twitter about how a whole bunch of people responded to them in what they said was meant to be a private joke for my friends. Well, first of all, that is so obviously bullshit, right? Because if it was a private joke for your friends, you wouldn't have posted it on a public post in a public social media site where people are bound to see, right? You wouldn't have made it intentionally as visible as possible, and you definitely wouldn't have made it then made several explanatory posts after that talking about D&D in broad terms and explaining how it's colonialist. One presume that your friends are all hip, woke hipsters. I almost said hip wokesters there. That can also work, though. That would already know that, right? That they would already know that's what you're supposed to pretend to believe, even though none of you really do believe that, but you pretend to believe that to be able to promote the agenda, right? So the fact that you then went on to explain it to the rubes proves that your whole intent right from the beginning was to reach out and specifically to attack people who like vanilla D&D the way it is, right? Right. Okay. So then you're crying about it. Now, obviously, nobody should do things like harass this person, send incitements to violence or harmful messages or anything illegal or do anything that would be other than criticizing the person's really, really stupid argument. Because it is. Ruby's argument is monumentally stupid. And I responded to it by something I pointed out in other videos before here, that was basically saying, D&D, yeah, I know that D&D is so inherently political, right? Because you should have seen how many people got mad at me when I pointed out that D&D, vanilla D&D, is about a group of multicultural, multiracial, multi-gendered individuals coming together to go and fight bigoted enemies that want to kill everyone that isn't like them, and to do this to protect weak regional minorities, right? Because that's the standard vanilla model of D&D. The standard vanilla model of D&D is the heroes are out in the frontier, in the wilderlands, by the keep on the borderlands, and there's the villagers there who are, there's a small community of humans. They're surrounded by orcs and goblins. And orcs and goblins don't represent diversity. The player characters do. They're humans and elves and half-elves and, gnomes. Well, hopefully not gnomes. Dwarves, halflings, male characters, female characters, all different classes, all different social levels. And they've come together, this weird, disparate bunch of people, lending their axe and their shield and their magic and their sword and their bow to go and fight this horde of racial supremacists, which is what orcs are, right? Orcs want to kill everything that isn't orcs, right? So they're going to save the regional minority, which are the humans, from this orcish horde. That's the model. And that is a model of Western civilization and classical liberalism. And that's why SJWs hate it, right? It represents all of the classic liberal values, right? Of these people that are totally different from each other, that nevertheless can come together within the common cause of defending civilization and civilizational values, right? That it doesn't matter if you're black or white, or, elf or dwarf, right? Or male or female, or miscellaneous even, right? All that matters is that you share the same ideals. The ideals matter. That is the classical liberal message. And that's why SJWs hate D&D so very much, and why they hate all these other elements of Western civilization in our society. Because they want to create a world where those things do matter, right? Where those things are important, and you create this whole hierarchy of first, second, and third class citizens based on perceptions of privilege that you had in the old regime before we overthrew it, right? Until eventually people with too much privilege get sent to the killing fields, the way that in Cambodia, anyone wearing glasses was accused of being a Western intellectual and was sent to the killing fields, right? That's the world that they want, right? And it also shows just, in the context of current events, you look at this and you think, well, look at how silly these people are, right? And yet you notice that they're still fighting with all this fervor, even as every Democrat-controlled city in the United States is literally on fire by acts of terrorism by these extreme leftists that want to overthrow our society, right? Even then, you still have these people acting as though somebody saying some mean words to them in their post that was intentionally meant to attack D&D, a game they do not play, that this is a hate crime, right? Not, lighting people on fire and blowing things up in actual cities, like your friends in Antifa are doing, right? But, both of this, what we see happening in gaming and what we see happening in the world at large is suggesting to me that I think that we are seeing a definite entry, and we're well into it, I think, of the decline of the force of the SJW movement. And I'm going to explain to you why. I'm a big, I'm a historian, right? So I'm very big into studying both the ideas and the concepts of what totalitarians present, right? Because you have to learn what your enemy really believes and how they really want to do things in order to oppose them. And also the case studies of the histories of different totalitarian movements and how they proceeded and what happened to them. And there's one thing that really absolutely fascinated me ever since I discovered it years ago, which is this this term to describe what happened to media in the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union during the final years, the last decade of the Soviet Union and its period of long decline before it collapsed. And this period in how the media, which was all official media, it was all establishment media, right? We're not talking about underground, Hungarian rebels posting pamphlets, right? We're talking about the official Pravda and the official TV station, all of their propagandistic media. They underwent a kind of shift in how they presented propaganda, which also was a larger cultural shift that all of the apparatchiks of the totalitarian state imposed on the people. And the term that came to be used for this state later on is called hypernormalization. And what hypernormalization means, it means beyond the norm, right? Beyond normal, where you expect something where you demand that something completely irrational be treated as normal. That's essentially it. Because what was happening, you see, propaganda is a very important tool of a totalitarian. And in the early stages of totalitarianism, propaganda is always tried to be presented in such a way as to convince the people, to manipulate the people into believing something that isn't really true, but trying to make a really credible case for it, right? So you would see, for example, at the beginning of the SJW movement, some fairly good, credible cases about, how what we want to create is a situation where there's, where women have the same rights as men in colleges, and right now they don't because there's only 48% women and 52% men in the colleges, and all of this sort of thing, and the idea that we're a bunch of feminazis that want to destroy men, that's just nonsense, right? Or those sorts of things, and then of course later on, once they've got once it's now, I don't know if it's 60 or 70% of undergraduates are women, they're like, no, fuck the men. We don't care about them. We never cared about them. Right? So that's of course what happens once they're winning. But at the time, when they needed to convince you, they tried to make something that sounded as reasonable as possible. And if you suggested that in fact they weren't that reasonable, it was the Mott and Bailey approach. They'd present a completely reasonable argument, and then they would end up making that lead to something that you would never agree to. But if you pointed to that thing you'd never agree to and said, that's what you really want, they'd go, no, of course not. No, that's just radical nonsense, and we wouldn't believe in that, right? And that's what happened, for example, in the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union, for much of its history, had a propaganda movement that was dedicated to convincing you of what they were trying to sell, right? They were trying to really effectively lie to the Soviet people to make them think that, for example, that America was a criminal and lawless place, that you saw workers there were horribly abused, that the average life of the Soviet worker was better than the American worker, that in America people had none of the rights and privileges that the Soviet citizen has, because there you have just the rich can do whatever they want to the poor and things like that, right? So they would try to craft an intelligent sort of story to convince. But by the time the hypernormalization period started to happen, because things were so advanced in their state of collapse, and the previous lies and exaggerations had to be extended so badly that they reached a breaking point, the Soviet media kind of said, well, screw it, now we're just going to blatantly lie to people. We're going to say things that they couldn't possibly believe, and yet they're going to be forced to agree with it, because the political apparatchiks, the political commissars in the Soviet Union will persecute anyone who dares to say it's not true, right? So they would say stuff like, our food production is at an all-time high, right? And everybody knew that wasn't true, but you had to agree that it was, right? They would say there are no bread lines, right? Like before, if there was a time when there was a food shortage and there were bread lines, what they would have done is say something like, yes, comrades, yes, there is a bread line now, there's a shortage, but it's because Comrade Blatnikov was actually a traitor in the service of Yankee imperialists, and we're going to execute him, then everything's going to get better really soon, and you'll see, right? And so they would try to convince you. But now they just say, no, there's no bread line, right? And you'd look out your window, and you'd see the goddamn bread line, right? But if somebody asked you and you weren't sure if they were an informant, you would have to say, of course there are no breadlines. I've never seen a breadline, right? You would have to say that, even though they know that you don't believe it. You know they know that you don't believe it. Everybody knows that everybody's lying. But the point isn't to convince you anymore. The point is to humiliate you by forcing you to declare something you absolutely know to be untrue as a test of loyalty. The goal is no longer to convince anyone. It's to make you prove your loyalty, because if you don't, you will be punished as an enemy of the movement, okay? And we are very clearly now, in terms of the SJWs in gaming and the SJWs in the world at large, very clearly at the end stages of that hypernormalization movement, right? You can see that by all these kind of contradictory claims that are made by the SJW crowd in the context of gaming, right? Where you have people saying, oh, well, you know, D&D gaming is completely unsafe for women. And then they, at the same person, and you're supposed to say, yes, it's completely unsafe for women. The same person will then say, you know, more women are in D&D now than have ever been before. And you have to say, yes, isn't that wonderful? How many women are in D&D? You know, and there have always been women in the design of D&D. They're more important than men are. Yes, that's right. And all three things, you have to believe all three things. It doesn't matter if they contradict each other partially or completely. You have to declare your allegiance to what the SJW leadership is telling you to think, right? And I mean, nothing is more evident of that than what we've seen this week, where you see violent groups of terrorists burning down cities, destroying buildings, causing mass havoc, attacking people, right? And then you have the SJW media telling you, no, these are all peaceful protesters. And you have to say, yes, they're all peaceful protesters, right? And then when they just to make sure that you have an extra loyalty test, they'll say there are no violent mobs attacking anyone, but also violent mobs that are attacking people are all white supremacists. There aren't the people from Black Lives Matter. They aren't the citizens of the town looting. It's white supremacists that have come to do it. It's definitely not Antifa or other people sent by George Soros or anything like that. White supremacists, right? And you watch the television and you see all these people, you know, that are destroying and looting things, and some of them are wearing Antifa banners and flags. They're dressed up in the Antifa black outfits. And then you see all these people looting, and they're not all black people, but there's certainly a lot of black people doing the looting, right? You're supposed to look at that picture of these people looting the Walmart and say, yeah, those black people, they're white supremacists, right? They're the ones that are doing the looting. The white supremacists, right? Those African-American white supremacists, right? That's what you're supposed to say, because it's hyper-normalization. The media, CNN, MSNBC, all of the BuzzFeed crowd and all of them, and SJW gamers too, right? They don't really want you to believe anymore. They just want you to still show that you have to obey them, right? Because if you refuse, then they're going to want to attack you. And this is something that is when they're losing all their grip on power. So now they don't care anymore about trying to change hearts and minds. What they care is holding on to their power to threaten you, to be able to keep trying to push for their agenda and to benefit themselves. So in a way, that's good news. It means that they've reached such an extreme that they've kind of given up hope of actually being able to take control of our society. Whether they know it or not. They might still think that they have that hope, but the way they're acting demonstrates that at least subconsciously they don't. The bad news is that, of course, that doesn't mean that they're going to go away tomorrow, right? The hypernormalization period in the Soviet Union lasted for years and years, and it also at least had a very definite endpoint, which was when the regime itself collapsed, when it ended. But there is no such moment that would absolutely define an endpoint for the SJW movement, because the SJW movement isn't a movement in a government, it's a revolutionary movement outside of a government. So what you can expect is that these people have gradually less and less power. They'll be gradually more and more ridiculed, but they could still keep being an important force for evil in the world for years to come, both, again, in the world at large and also in D&D gaming. But we've learned some important lessons today. I hope you like this little history lesson. And keep in mind, if any of you are listening from Wizards of the Coast, these people themselves admit they don't play or buy your games. So don't try to sell your games to people who despise you, right? And if you're a gamer, don't buy your games from people who despise you. You want to, if you're a game seller, to sell your games to people who like your games and who have the chance of liking your games, not to people who have an ideological agenda to destroy your games because they see it as a pawn in their larger chess game of ideological warfare against the Western world, right? And if you're a gamer, don't buy from companies or authors that are making games who are also actively calling you somebody who has to be destroyed, right? For the great glorious new revolution. Now, if you do want to support someone who loves all gamers, and I want everyone to play my games, I want everyone to play D&D, and I don't believe that you are evil or despicable for playing D&D, then please check out my own products. Please share this video and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and hit the like button. But if you want to support me, besides Patreon or PayPal, I've got those, and you could just throw money at me and I'll be very glad. But you might also instead want to consider purchasing my games, right? Stuff like my excellent Cults of Chaos sourcebook that you can use to create any kind of chaos sect or cult for any kind of fantasy game, but especially your OSR style or D&D style games. The Old School Companion, which adds medieval authenticity to your old school game. Lion and Dragon, medieval authentic OSR role-playing rules, and many others, including the RPG Pundit Presents series of PDFs, and RPG Pundit Presents number 100, Star Adventure, which is available on print and PDF. It's an OSR space opera RPG, a complete RPG, which you can get for $9.99 in print and PDF together. So that's a great bargain. And it's been selling really, really well. And thank you to everyone who's been buying it. My newest game, Star Adventure. So be sure to check that out. The description is in the link below. Share this video anywhere that you like, especially anywhere where it's going to inspire gamers or piss off the SJWs. Go for it, right? And I hope you'll check out the rest of my videos if you haven't already. Thank you very much. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Volcano plus Blue Boar.